While many people look at the issue of medical cannabis and they feel like we've won from headlines about how well cannabis businesses are doing, it's often hard to see what's happening behind the scenes. And as a patient advocacy organization, of course, we spend a lot of time looking at the current challenges. And so it's appropriate at the ASA Unity Conference that we would have a panel today, the current challenges faced by the medical cannabis marketplace and patients. And we have a great group of people for you to hear today. These panelists are friends of mine as well as advisors, and I'm excited for you to meet them and hear their perspectives on the challenges facing medical cannabis. So one of our speakers is the co-founder and CEO of Mother Ruggers and a cannabis activist. Stormy Simon is a e-commerce pioneer. She's an entrepreneur, a corporate renegade, a public speaker, and a cannabis activist. She's a celebrated business leader, and she actually started off her career at a company we all know, Overstock.com. She started there as a temp, and over 15 years, she became president of a nearly $2 billion company by 2013. We also have Ellen Lenox-Smith, who is the co-director for the cannabis advocacy for U.S. Pain Foundation. She is one of the leading voices for patients living in pain in Rhode Island and across the country. She's also a celebrated medical cannabis advocate. She has spoken before at Unity, but she's also, does a lot of not just public speaking, but also has been featured in the press in the New York Times, Washington Post, NPR. And what I love about Ellen is that she is always willing to take a minute and tell her story, but also to stand up for not only medical cannabis patients who currently have access, but also the millions of patients that are not yet able to use medical cannabis or may not even know that cannabis is an option for pain. She was a career educator teaching middle school, and she actually had to retire because of health issues. And since then, she has been a devoted patient advocate. We also have with us Pamela Epstien. She is the Chief Legal and Regulatory Officer for Eden Enterprises. She has a diverse background that includes legal, land use, environmental work, and this put her in a unique position to advise her clients on cannabis regulations. She's known as a fearless advocate for cannabis businesses, and she is currently the president of the California Cannabis Industry Association. She is on the board of director and co-chairs the Retail and Distribution Committee on the board and a board member of the California Hemp Council, and she is a member of the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp, where she chairs the Committee on Standards. And we're also going to hear from Dr. Stephen Dahmer, who is a physician and a researcher and an advisor to me. He has been at Goodness Growth Holdings, Vireo Health, for over 15 years, which is a physician founded company that's providing best-in-class cannabis-based medicinal products. He is a board-certified practicing family physician. He's also an assistant clinical professor of family medicine and community health, and he's actively engaged in 2 large clinical trials specific to cannabis and chronic pain. He's also written and lectured extensively about plant-based medicines. So I think that this group is going to really give us a holistic view of all of the challenges facing medical cannabis today. So now we are going to hear from Ellen Lenox-Smith. I'm so glad you're here, Ellen, and I'm so glad that you can share your story with our members.
Well, thank you very much for including me today. My name is Ellen Lenox-Smith, as mentioned, and my husband and I are co-directors for the U.S. Pain Foundation for Cannabis Advocacy for the country. We've been involved with this ever since I became a patient back in 2007. I live with Ehlers-Danlos, which is a connective tissue disorder, which means not only do I have problems with joints that dislocate and sublux, I also am unable to metabolize most medications. The only thing that was there for me to turn to was cannabis, and it's literally kept me alive and given me quality of life back. So I'm very grateful to be able to share this story. Cannabis has been something we've been advocating for a long time, trying to help I'm now 72, getting to be an old lady here. And it's really, I still see people so hesitant to consider turning to it. What I'd like to do is share some things that I still see as problems in our country with the medical program. For instance, stigma. People are still having problems with housing and how do they medicate. Still having problems across the country with employment if they're a medical patient, and even the hesitancy about whether they should use it because of the stigma that still is existing. That has come a long way, but we still do have a problem in this country to get people to be more comfortable to be able to turn to this. And that includes the fact that cannabis still sits in Schedule 1. It's not a consistent issue for people to use it across the country because of this. We have many doctors that, although they believe in it, they are still uncomfortable recommending and suggesting the use of it to a patient because they just feel that possibly their credentials could be on the line. So we need to get that out of Schedule 1. And along with that, because of such a hesitancy and comfortable feeling for doctors to encourage us to use this, many of them really don't have the knowledge that would come with other medications they might suggest to a patient to try. So clearly we want that research, which is the bill that just recently went through. We need that research to help support doctors to feel comfortable to speak out and support the use of this. Along with the fact that it's stuck in Schedule 1, cannabis is the only thing I'm able to metabolize. I've now had 27 surgeries. Every time I go into a hospital, all of a sudden, lo and behold, I can't use the one medication for pain that I'm able to use that gives me relief. Hospitals will not, in my experience, had never allowed me to use it. I take it in a simple oil form, but yet the fact that it's cannabis, it's listed in Schedule 1, I am denied use of medication. So it's been a very difficult journey, having to have so many corrective surgeries and not be able to get the pain relief while I'm there in the hospital. The biggest gift for me is to get out and go home and to medicate. Another problem is traveling. It's so inconsistent across the country. It's obviously something you don't want to be caught having in your suitcase or in your carry-on. So traveling for us is a serious problem. I really can't use something else. And what happens if I end up in a state that doesn't allow me to use it there? So traveling is a problem. We need conformity from state to state because it's extremely confusing for patients. Affordability and accessibility has remained a problem. Many people also have trouble even getting to a dispensary. So one good thing the COVID did do for us is many places now have a delivery or pickup, which order online, which is wonderful. I have found there's a huge confusion about CBD versus cannabis that has come out since the hemp bill. People seem to be more frightened with the thought of using THC because of CBD, that you can just go in a local, grocery store or gas station and pick up CBD, of which right now still does not have regulations. We're working on that, but until they come there, people are really confused. And I think it's also put a little stigma against cannabis. And people think, well, if I can just buy this other stuff, I'm fine. Why would I need to get the real cannabis plant? But many people don't understand, if you're living with pain, that extra THC above 3% makes a huge difference in directing, helping relieve the pain. Let's see, many people, when they go to a dispensary, also find that they're getting directions that sound wonderful, but they go home and try it and they might be sent home to ingest the full dose that would eventually be right for them. But to start that way, I'm finding many patients will end up turning around being scared to death because they had a dramatic reaction because their body wasn't ready for the full dose, as opposed to slowly increasing that dose. So I recommend that for fixes, let's get this out of Schedule 1. It should be part of a curriculum for medical people in the country. It should not be a little paragraph. It should be something that doctors and medical people have an education about. We need to be careful when we add recreational to a state that we don't separate, that we keep separate the regulations for medical versus recreational. And that's a really serious problem. We fortunately succeeded in Rhode Island to keep it separate, but states that have not had that happen, there are people, particularly young children with seizures and autism, that are really having a difficult time in one visit to a dispensary getting the quantity of medication they need. Let's see. And I think we need to continue, as I said, with the pickup and delivery system. And let's make sure on top of that, every person who's putting this into their body has been able to purchase medication or grow medication that is clean and safe and properly tested. That's extremely important. So thank you for listening. I hope that helps.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing that story. And I a lot of people may not understand, what the impact of each of those issues. I know you just covered a lot, but, for people who can't travel, we're not just talking about people who can't go to Disneyland. We're talking about people who are missing weddings, funerals, graduations, end of life visits with people that are dying, that it's just not possible for our patients to travel, and they're missing out in so much life. I think, a lot of Americans got to experience what it feels like to be a medical cannabis patient during COVID lockdown. That is what many of our patients have been living through for over 20 years. And each one of those items that Ellen brought up, not only do they have impacts on individual lives, but the solutions are complicated policy, right? That take a lot of work. And so I just want to say, Ellen, thank you so much for your dedication, and you're just such an amazing advocate, and you inspire me every day. And thank you for not only sharing your story, but your work with the U.S. Pain Foundation is really important, that you're not just talking about those people who already know about medical cannabis, but those individuals who are, it's not even being presented as an option because they don't know about it or their doctor doesn't know about it. And here at American Safe Access, we're fighting for those people who don't even know that they need to be fought for, right? And I think that that work is hard, and it's a heavy lift. And thank you so much for that. I think that's one of the things that you had mentioned was doctors being educated, but also speaking out. And our next speaker is also a big inspiration to me, and someone who not only is walking the walk in various categories as a medical professional, but also uses his voice and his platform to educate other doctors and to bring these issues not only to his patients live in the exam room, but also making sure that other doctors know about this as well as elected officials. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Dahmer. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, what a pleasure, Steph. You stole my thunder. I was going to say the same thing about ASA just while I had the microphone, and a tremendous organization. And thank you for organizing this conference and giving us this platform. And Ellen, I was listening to you speak, and I was kind of thinking, well, I don't even need to go. You covered everything very eloquently, and I really appreciate that. And a big fan of U.S. Pain Foundation, and even the Invisible Project really opened my eyes as a family physician. And maybe I'll jump into my background so those on the conference here know why I might be speaking. I'm a board certified family physician. I've practiced for over 20 years, and that has always been my day job and bread and butter. About 7 years ago, I did accept a position as a chief medical officer of Goodness Growth, also known as Vireo Health, where I've really done everything as a startup, from changing toilet seats, which maybe I don't like to admit, to hiring pharmacists and overseeing our retail, and really having a firsthand role in education of patients, which is the bread and butter of a physician. Many forget that the word doctor comes from the Latin docere, to teach, interacting with regulators, and really across the board front lines in what it takes to run a cannabis operation in very medical states, Minnesota and New York. And that kind of evolved to also work in many large-scale research projects. And the only reason that we're able to participate in those is really because of philanthropic organizations, even an NIH grant, and tremendous affiliations. The title, kind of our of our talk here is challenges to medical. And again, I'll probably reiterate a lot of what Ellen said. First and foremost, we have to still argue, maybe not on this call, but in everything we do outwardly, that cannabis is actually a medicine. Schedule 1 deems that it is not. And so we're constantly fighting not only against all of the laws that fight against the business trying to operate in the cannabis space, but the stigma that surrounds something that still is on a federal level illegal. I think another big thing from a medical perspective that is a huge challenge we don't talk enough about is the complexity of this plant. And so on one hand, I oftentimes say there are few plants studied as much as cannabis. But when you're talking about hundreds of constituents, this is multiple drugs in a single plant. And so we like to lump everything under cannabis, and that's truly unfair. Again, we have from a CBD spectrum, which is FDA approved as a anti-seizure medication in specific cases, to pure THC, which is also FDA approved as Marinol, but every shade in between. And the complexity of this plant, when paired with the complexity of the symptoms and conditions, as Ellen is just touching the tip of the iceberg, it makes it for very difficult to really approach this plant as a medicine, which unfortunately to date, and this is something that I really take to heart, and one of the reasons I get up in the morning to perform or to participate in research and to do the fight that we do, is a majority of patients, and I've witnessed this for 7 years, perform self-care, which I'm a huge fan of. But Ellen, I'm willing to guess you had to guess and try and jump through multiple different products before you even found the one that fit you. And while that can be amazing, right, that you finally found something that works for you, it's a long and laborious process that you're still in pain during that time. And what I'm very concerned about is, while I'm excited about the act that President Biden just signed into law about research, that will potentially allow for one FDA-approved medication 5-10 years down the line to come through the pipeline. And patients like Ellen and so many others that have experimented with multiple in a landscape of cannabis that's very versatile and very diverse, found the one that works for them, are not just going to jump over to this new FDA-approved medication. Oftentimes it won't be the same. And so I think that the act that was signed by President Biden is not nearly enough. We truly need research on the products, or what I sometimes call generic products, that patients in, about 75, the majority of Americans have access to, are utilizing in their daily life. And we need money for that research immediately. And while I say, we've participated in research, it's only truly because our founder is a physician, has an eye to do research, and we've been blessed with third-party affiliations and even private donors that have fostered that to make that happen. And I'm probably running on my time here, and I just want to say two last things and just echo what Ellen said too, that for me, it really irritates me that 7 years into this, number one, we still struggle to see cannabis as a medicine, but number two, we're nowhere close to those that are combating chronic illness to offering cannabis at the same copay that you can get an opioid for. And that has been something that I've long identified as kind of an internal goal for myself that I'm not going to give up. I do see research as a potential angle by which this could be covered by insurance or prices be brought down even further, specifically in medical programs. And until cannabis is offered on an even level playing field with opioids and at that copay, we're doing our patients a disservice. And then finally, I just do want to echo too, is quality. And I think that the patchwork of programs in various states, unfortunately, one of the first things that may suffer can potentially be quality. We have a minimum bar for the strawberries that we eat in the grocery store. And to not have that minimum bar on a national level is an absolute disservice to the 5+ million Americans, in my read, in state legal programs that are using cannabis as a therapy. And I'll pause there, Steph, but a couple just follow-up thoughts to the great intro that Ellen already gave.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was really helpful to sort of fill in some of why those gaps are there that Ellen was describing. And I just want to say, I know that the road of research is not easy, and I just want to say thank you, for continuing to navigate that very often confusing and very expensive road. And I think something you said is really important, that and this comes up for us a lot in our advocacy, we're not asking for the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis. That is not our ultimate fight. But we're also not, we're not okay with just staying in a compassionate use space, right? That there is a middle ground. And I know this can be hard for policymakers, but the reality is the regulatory agency by which medical cannabis should, should be classified, it doesn't exist yet. And as someone who's been making this up as we've gone for 20 years, I'm not giving up that creativity and that imagination and settling for one or the other. And again, that research is what is going to be key to that. And you don't have to have a FDA approved drug to have standardized products that have gone through an evidence-based model. And what's great about medical cannabis is that as long as you're not tinkering with this beautiful plant, the safety profile is known, right? And it's really in the tinkering that costs so much money. So thank you so much. I'm excited to dive into some more in
Steph, can I add just one last thing? Because
please,
as a physician, I want to add this in as well to something that Ellen said that really hit home for me. And that is, I unfortunately also still see the Schedule I designation of cannabis almost as a shield for medical professionals not to learn and interact more with this plant. And it really frustrates me. As a family physician practicing for decades, if you tell me that you're using heroin, I don't turn my back. I ask you, where do you get it from? Do you have clean needles? Is there something I can do to help you? And for us to do that with a substance like cannabis, as you said, Steph, from my read, an incredibly safe safety profile, and for us to turn our backs and not know more about that, for me, it's such a disservice that the medical community is not a source of information and feedback for patients that are exploring this, even if it is dissuasion for a patient that it might not be best for, but to know more about that and to really be an active participant and play an active role in patients that are utilizing this as therapy. And I've seen tremendous changes in 7 years. And so I will give the medical profession that, but we have a long ways to go.
No, thank you. And the truth is, this doesn't just happen overnight. And part of this conference with our yesterday, today, and tomorrow theme is, this panel, we're kind of looking and taking a snapshot of what, the challenges that we're facing right now. But those challenges, are very different from the ones that we were facing 20 years ago when we were dealing with DEA crashing down the doors and all of these things. But we didn't just get to here 20 years later, and we probably have 20 more years of struggling and fighting to get to where we need to go. But the way that happens isn't by sitting on the sidelines and complaining. It means turning that complaint into an articulatable solution and then fighting for it. And so that's what many of the people who are here are doing. And I'm so grateful that you're all here to share your experiences with our members for that. But something that I think that a lot of patients experience is that, we did all of this hard work to create these programs. Like, the reason people are not getting arrested now is because our patients came up to Capitol Hill time and time again, because, Americans for Safe Access, we documented all of the raids and kept up with all of that work, that it feels like after we passed the CJS amendment, we just stopped hearing from a lot of the cannabis businesses. And I think for many of us, we're like, are we being paranoid? Like, are they just busy? And someone I've brought to share for her experience and story is now a good friend of mine, Stormy Simon, who's going to share some of her experience of sort of being outside of the cannabis marketplace, and then her experience of working within. So Stormy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Steph. And thank you guys. What a cool place to be on this panel. Like, who would have known that my path would eventually lead me to this, medicinal topic? Like, who would have thought in my lifetime? So I came from the big business world before I hopped into this industry, but I feel like I joined it when I was 15 years old and I first smoked weed. And, I've never really been ashamed about that, but I was always really fascinated by how it affected me, because we couldn't even talk about it. I grew up in Utah. So this was like, I was sinning. But anyway, I was never a drinker. I never had my release. I've enjoyed cannabis, most of my life. When Colorado went legal, I found this to be one of the most fascinating things I could, we could experience in a lifetime. You had the prohibition where people's voices get stronger than our government, and they get stronger to where we force them to make a move. So kudos to every governor who raised their hand first, and everybody should move to states like that. When they did it in Colorado, I wanted to be in that state. Granted, I had this really great job, and I didn't even know what it meant to go in the cannabis industry. So I literally quit my job in e-commerce and moved to Denver. And I joined this little operation doing maybe $3 million a year, which is amazing. That was medicinal only. And that was so key into the next steps. Here we are 6 years later, and what my path has been since then. But it was a medicinal only thing. And I had these young kids, it's great to have Dr. Dahmer here and doctors now. But at the time, these young kids that had moved from different places across the United States to be in Denver and grow their own medicine. And that's how they spoke. The 22-year-old with tattoos who rode a skateboard into work every day with Crohn's disease, who's left his family to come and figure it out himself. And they saw themselves as providers. They saw themselves as nurturers of this medicine. And those kids changed my life. And I started questioning to myself, like, what is it about me that makes it work for me? Also questioning our government, like, show up. Where are you? Thanks, Biden, for your little tiny signature. Let's go. So kudos to all the patients here, because it's your voice when we are looking around going, who's going to educate the doctors? It's you guys. It's Ellen. This is enough. We've had enough. This is the plant whose history, by this time, this much later. So I realize the government has suppressed us for so long, 1930s. You can go read it. Ellen, my parents were terrified of marijuana because of reefer madness. Like, it's this stigma that was just propaganda in the meantime. And so much information has come out. You can study other countries who have permission to study a plant. I went back 10,000 years, as far back as I could go on this. I studied this like crazy to figure out, how did it go wrong? And I'll tell you how it went wrong. Capitalism came first, and that was it. So, when we talk about the hurdles that we face within medicine, or, who knows what they are anymore at this point of the game, right? They're almost comical. But I think about the things where, any of us can grow this plant. And right now we are all, I have a favorite strain. My strain is Durban poison. Why? I don't have any idea. Why did I have to figure that out on my own? Why am I researching terpenes and trying to self-medicate? Because the government's decided that this plant's the devil. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but I want to make a strong point, because the folks that are in this program, the 20 years that Steph has done, Americans for Safe Access, I learned all of this. I left that grow, walked away from equity, started meeting the parents, really started learning about the magic, because it's magic right now because science won't help us. The magic that this plant has on children, on people, on pain, on whatever it is for each of us. And yet 10 million voices still isn't enough, right? We still got to be like, oh, these little tiny movements, and we are bigger than the permission we're asking for. We're bigger than that at this point. Like, there are people. The civil rights piece of this, like the recreational side, the civil right to buy a plant when you want. I think everybody got distracted there because there's so much money there. The other people that had been forgotten during the transition were the traditional growers, like these folks that risked their lives for many years to get all of us our medicine, who had really taken the time to nurture and grow a plant that their patients responded to without permission. So that I believe there are many out there, and I believe it's groups like these that are pushing this to happen. We don't come from a capitalistic place when we talk about the plant. That's very different than what we're up against, including our government, including Biden, including whoever's sitting in that presidential seat. They're up against a capitalistic market, and they kind of prefer it. You know, when we are battling opiates, like people are dying. 6 people a week were dying in the state of Utah, and they made the most complicated medical program probably any of the 50 states will do. And I moved. You know, so for me, it's more than a platform. I had so many things I was going to say, but I got so fired up with Ellen and Dr. Dahmer because like I'm watching on the outside going, let's go. You know, I couldn't make a dollar off selling a plant. I wanted a brand. I wanted all these things, and it's just not right. For me, it didn't feel right. For those that are doing it, I support them. I buy their product. I love it. But for medical patients, it's nowhere near good enough. Your voice matters. You're equally as important as the person that went to the hospital, got the surgery, and gets their opiates. And push harder, scream louder. I know Steph is doing so much work on actually getting something written that for whatever reasons that our lawmakers cannot understand the history, whatever it is that has blocked them from very simple movements. I just want to enforce and say, I believe more in the work that Steph is doing, and don't give up, quit asking permission, and find your clan that will research it anyway. Because you know what? They'll bend. The last thing the federal government wants to be is not the smartest guy in the room. And I don't even know where that came from.
That was great. Well, thank you so much, Stormy. And I mean, I think that it's so important for us as a movement to not just talk to ourselves, right? And I feel like, Stormy, one of the things that was really exciting when I met you and was able to really talk was to hear, stories a couple peels back. I mean, when I start talking about medical cannabis, I'm like in statutes, I am, deep into it. And so I think part of the next step of the work that we need to do as medical cannabis advocates is that we need more people, right? We need to inspire our allies, but also find ways that our allies can plug in. And part of that is, one, reminding our allies that how much work is still left to be done. Like a lot of people, it's like if you've never had cancer before, you probably don't know that there's over 187 types of cancer. You probably couldn't name one cancer drug besides chemo. And you definitely don't understand the regulations or what insurance coverage, it's just not in your knowledge bank. And as medical cannabis patients and advocates, we have to remember that people, they see the headline about a $25 billion industry in cannabis, and they feel like we've won, right? They're like, oh, that's over. So it's really that work and also, really appreciating and giving voice to our allies to share to that, to bring to that table and to into the story. And I think one of the really challenging components of being a medical cannabis advocate sometimes is that we have to be an expert when we're in the room with our doctor explaining our medication to them. We have to be an expert when we're at a dispensary, trying to understand and use language that maybe the person working there doesn't understand. Like, I love it when I go to a dispensary and someone's like, oh, I like using this. And I always ask, oh, you have dystonia? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, then why do I care what a healthy 19-year-old is using, right? So, it's like we're constantly educating everyone, right? We're educating people like, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't go to your daughter's wedding because it's in Iowa, and really explaining why, what that means. So, so that's our work, but it's also our work to become policy experts. And we can't just depend on, little news clippets to really understand the impacts of what policy and legislation has. And I think for a lot of people, and Ellen touched on this, is just sort of the confusion around CBD products and around, now it started with CBD products, but now it's THC, Delta 8, sort of all of these other crazy cannabinoids. But that, there's a lobby side of that, of why that is there. But there's also a real consequences of policy. So I met, I can't believe it took this long for Pamela and I to meet. and we met at a conference in Vegas, and we were actually on a panel, and I just kind of stopped talking and listened to this girl because I really appreciated her perspective on the hemp bill. But Pamela also, as we were talking about this conference, also shared a little bit of her own story with me about being a medical cannabis patient and about, really the impact that the work that Asa has done and Ellen has done on everyone. So Pamela, welcome. And we're hoping we can hear a little bit more of your story and your perspective on the Farm Bill.
Oh, absolutely. And it's such an honor to be included amongst this group. And Steph, thank you so much for the work that you've done for a decade, right? It's amazing to be able to look 2 decades, I'm sorry. 2 decades to be able to look back and see how far we've come and yet still how far we have to go. So I'm going to try to make it relatable. The law often is not, and specifically in cannabis is counterintuitive and it conflicts. We'll talk about the difference without a distinction between cannabis and hemp and really how that affects the medical patients and the consumers in general. So as Steph said, I am a patient. First and foremost, cannabis gave me a professional career that I love. It gave me control over my life. I suffer from debilitating migraines. I have my entire life. And at a point, I was a cannabis consumer, much like everybody, like Stormy said, at 15, right? I started to self-medicate because it was what was working, right? I was able to control more of my migraines, and I didn't even know that's what was happening. I just knew I felt better. And so as that took shape and I became a lawyer, I was supposed to be a professional, right? And professionals don't do this. And the law was teaching me that there was this distinction. And if you did that, you needed to have an attorney protect you if you were caught with this. And so I went through that whole iteration of law school, really thinking that cannabis, if you were going to be a cannabis attorney, you were going to be a criminal attorney. And I then stopped consuming cannabis, and the uptick in my migraines was significant. It was so significant that I was in and out of the hospital with migraines 15 more days a month. It was kind of funny. I would take my computer with me because I had billable hours, and the computer screen was hard because the lights were hard. So the room would be dark, the computer would be dim, and I would try to be working, getting, IV Dilaudid, because they don't know what was going on with migraines, and they treated the pain, but not the underlying symptom. And I was fortunate. I lived in San Francisco and at that time, and I was fortunate to meet a neurologist who was talking about the endocannabinoid system, something I had no idea about. And when they asked me all these questions about drug use and what was happening, they're like, well, if your alternative is disability and if your stock and trade is your cognition, you should try this. And to Dr. Dahmer's point, I kept a diary and I figured out what cannabinoids and what cannabinoid titrations worked for me, but it was so difficult. And I was so fortunate to be living in a state where that was palatable. And then I was confronted with moving to another state and leaving California and not being able to take my medicine with me, but being a card carrying member of having 60 Vicodin a month prescribed to me. And that was totally acceptable. So how does that all relate to cannabis and the schedule and the Farm Bill? The Farm Bill in 2018 did really important things. It opened the door, it made CBD, it made other things more accessible, but at the same time, it was a difference without a distinction. And it doesn't matter where THC is sourced from, it will affect your body the same way. So when the Farm Bill allowed all these intoxicating hemp-derived cannabinoids, they're converted. So what Steph, you were saying earlier, that the plant and what naturally occurs in the plant is what the plant produces. When you start to tinker and you start to move chemical bonds around, you're using highly volatile chemicals and solvents to do that. In regulated markets where we have standardization, you then have the ability to trust your medicine. And as a patient myself, that is fundamentally the most important thing. That is what we don't get through things like the Farm Bill, which did federally legalize, I would argue, cannabis for everything except high potency flower at this point. And so you have a pervasion of products that are through e-commerce, that there's this patchwork with Delta 8. And what you can't do is trust the medicine that you've been trusting. And if you're a patient and you can't use your insurance to get the medicine that you need, you're looking for avenues that are cost effective. But what is cost effectiveness if you don't trust that product, or you can't trust that it is safe in how you are consuming it? And so where we have these challenges from the Farm Bill, we also have a very unique opportunity in 2023. So as Stormy said, your voices matter. Your voices could not matter more now, because we have this very unique piece of legislation which has to be passed every 5 years. The Farm Bill is continually reauthorized. It's about the entire scope of agriculture in this country, and it is written into the Authorizations and the Appropriations Act. So it already has the tools that it needs. These new bills that Steph is ushering in with medical cannabis, so incredibly important. But the journey is harder because they have to be written into both the authorization and the appropriation bills in order to be funded to move forward. So if we take the Farm Bill opportunity to invest and redirect the FDA to help us get whole plant medicine, to have the proper discussion, to talk about the fact that we already have federally legalized cannabis, so we should lean into that in ways that harmonize and standardize and really ensure that people are getting the good quality products that they need, that they deserve, that they're looking for. That's the responsibility and the role of government, is to ensure that public health and safety is shepherded. That is the role of the FDA. And the unfortunate reality of cannabis is it is a special unicorn that benefits from almost nothing and is subject to everything. And it doesn't fit neatly into the boxes that we currently have. So I'm going to run a little bit long because I'm just going to wrap it up, but it doesn't fit neatly. It is both a pure plant-driven medicine. It does have pharmaceutical applications. It is an adult use product. It is all of these things in one, like Dr. Dahmer said. This plant, the very sheer elements of the Farm Bill only regulating THC by one cannabinoid of a plant that contains over 100, let alone now the new and novel cannabinoids coming out every day. We need to start treating this plant like it truly is. It is a commodity, and everything that is in it, we should be driving towards cannabinoid regulation. What is a total intoxication? How did this product as final form, how is it going to get to the consumer, and how can we use the foundational tools and the legislation and the regulation that exists in an ecosystem that benefits the most vulnerable of the society that wants to use this product? That is children, but that is also medical patients, and they should not be like interchanged and in a hierarchy. They all deserve standardization and regulation that allows them to get clean access to this product, to this medicine, and have all of the tools that we get to deserve, like insurance, like having physicians be able to have an open dialogue. And I hope that we can do that through new pieces of legislation, and specifically through the Farm Bill. So if anybody has any more specific questions about that, I'll talk to anybody offline about the Farm Bill. I love it. I think it's going to be great. But Steph and everybody else, this was such a pleasure and an honor. And thank you for bringing everybody together.
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Pamela. It's I'm so excited to know you. I'm so excited that we're in each other's orbits. We're actually going to go into a Q&A right after this, and we'll keep the conversation going. But before we do that, I again just want to thank this panel so much. Thank you all for the time that you spend with me personally, helping me be a better advocate, but also sharing this with our members. I think that if I had one hope that would sort of come out of people hearing this panel, is that people can take a minute and empathize and actually think about cannabis outside of your own experience. And I think one of the reasons I was able to found Americans for Safe Access was I could have continued to get cannabis from drug dealers and been fine and figured out my own pathway. But what I realized was that I had a privilege that not everyone had, and that privilege was I'm white in this country. I don't have children. I don't have things I could lose, and a lot of our patients don't have that luxury. Like they can't speak out because they could lose their federal housing, or their children could be taken away. And I think that for medical cannabis advocacy moving forward, it's important that even if you have your access, even if you are going to be fine, really think about what it means in the world we could live in if everybody had that access and not just the privilege. So I'm excited to to dive in deeper with all of you and hear questions from our attendees. Wasn't that a fantastic panel? I'm so excited we get to spend some more time. We're actually running a little ahead of time, so we let our other Stormy and Pamela know that they'll be jumping on soon. But it was pretty amazing recording that panel, and so exciting hearing it back. Dr. Dahmer, you look like you're hiding your identity.
I'm gonna switch computers. You promoted me as a panelist, and I was gonna jump on my other computer, so I might jump on a different computer here if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
I might have a little bit more light, and I want to check.
Yeah, because we have like scramble your voice too. So.
I'm gonna yeah. Don't do that. Don't do that. I'll be back in 1 second. So let me in.
Hello, Ellen.
Steph, can you hear me?
I can hear you wonderfully.
Good.
So Ellen, I'm while we're waiting for the other panelists to join, I'm hoping you can share with our members a little bit more about patient advocacy and what obviously you use your voice at the U.S. Pain Foundation, you use your voice as an ASA member, and I think a lot of people maybe they're ASA members, but maybe they don't know how to insert themselves in their legislature or even in the public discourse. So I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit with our members about being a patient advocate.
Absolutely. To be honest with you, being a patient advocate gives me purpose and meaning back in life. When you're diagnosed with an incurable condition and you lose your career and life's not the same, it's been incredibly helpful to take this on, and it became a no-brainer. As soon as I realized what cannabis did for me, it was instantly something my husband and I both decided we just had to speak out and get other people comfortable. Simple things like here in our state, Rhode Island just became full legalization, but yet here we were as medical patients still paying for a card if we didn't fight that process. No one was caring about the medical program all of a sudden. They were just thinking about the money they're going to make for full legalization. So, we reached out in letters to the editors, to, op-eds, reach out and literally wrote to every legislator in our state and called them up and tried to wake them up and say, hey, remember us. You can't allow everybody else to have free access, and yet you're going to charge us to pay for a card to go into a dispensary. It made no sense. Not only that, in our state now people can legally grow even outside, and yet I was still paying for a tag for each plant that was in my basement that I'm home growing for medicine. So, speaking up really does help, and people will listen. And it's not always that they're trying to be mean. A lot of times they're thinking about what is this going to do for our state in terms of creating revenue, and you just have to kind of remind them we're patients. I still have to get full paid, out of my pocket for this medicine, where you go to a pharmacy and most of you get a pretty darn decent copay, and you're just paying a small amount, and I'm not, and still fighting that. So speaking up is going to help you with your medical condition, because will give you purpose and meaning. And I think if we can just make it better for the next generation, and hopefully for my time left here at 72, I just find it really does help out. And to me, it's been an honor to advocate, and I will continue to do that until I can't anymore, because it's very, very important. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. And I meet patient advocates all the time, or medical cannabis advocates that they're really beaten down, right? And they really feel like there's this huge conspiracy against them. And then when I ask them, well, what did your elected officials say? And they tell me, well, I've never talked to my member of Congress. I've never talked to my elected official. And I say this a lot, and I don't mean to discourage people from, yes, I guess there are some conspiracies out there. But I think more than their conspiracies, there's also just a lot of inaction. And, elected officials have a lot on their plate. Yes, they choose, to move into public service, but I think people forget that what they're doing is public service. And that, if you're a city council member, the amount of things you have to navigate through and understand, from sewage, like literally dealing with sewage in your city, and all the way up to a member of Congress having to become experts on foreign policy and the tax code and all of these components. So if you are not talking to your elected official, they are not hearing this perspective. Like, it really isn't something that they're going to come across unless you are bringing it to them. And I'd say even furthermore to that, there are people talking to your elected officials about medical cannabis, right? There is a more and more we're seeing the hemp lobby that is talking to your elected officials, telling them that THC is evil and that CBD is all that patients really need. And so if they don't hear your perspective, that's the last thing they heard about it. There are drug test companies that are going in to meet with every member of Congress and telling lies about the days that you're walking me. Yeah, sorry. Debbie's like rocking me over here. Like, am I having a spasm? No, it's just Debbie. But they're hearing that point of view. There's Kevin Savet and Sam and all of these other perspectives, and they are talking to their member of Congress. So I really, when you see an action alert come across your desk from Americans for Safe Access, we're not sending stuff to you because we're bored and just want to add to your inbox. We're reminding you that we just came across an opponent talking to members of Congress, and we need you in Indiana, you in Iowa, you in California to talk to your member. So hello, Stormy. We actually, this never happens. We are actually running ahead at a conference. So hi, Pamela. It's so great to see you, and Dr. Dahmer. Debbie, do we have some questions for the?
Yeah, we do. We have some good questions, and keep them coming, guys, please. This is a good one since it just occurred. What do you guys think of the medical cannabis research law? Do you think it will encourage doctors to learn about medical cannabis? And anyone can take this one.
Yeah, Dr. Dahmer, do you want to take a first stab at that question?
Yeah, I would love to jump in.
A lot about it.
I would love to jump in, and I think it's like anybody that spends time in cannabis, it's tough because you oftentimes, you sit on this knife's edge where you get excited. Wow, okay, we're talking about cannabis research, and here on a federal level, we signed an act, which is wonderful, and then it calls positive attention to it, and so all those things I think are great. And when I've lectured, to many medical professionals, and you sit in a room, and it's not as welcoming as this panel, right? It's really many physicians that are anti-cannabis or shooting you down, or I've had even the heckler in the front row. And you then realize that this is a big win, right? This is a big win to shed a positive light on cannabis, that it does deserve research, that it should be, addressed on a federal level, that President Biden should have these acts on his desk and he should be evaluating them and signing them. And the flip side that, I think we've been pretty vocal about as well is that it's not nearly enough. It's not nearly enough and needs to go so much further because the United States is decades behind even other countries in the world that have spearheaded this, that we need real answers to the products that patients are utilizing in state legal programs right now. And my biggest concern with this type of research is we'll see an FDA-approved medication 5-10 years down the line that will be one medication. And my hope is that it is a botanical drug. There have only been 2 botanical drugs that have gone through the FDA process tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 prescription drugs. There's only been 2 botanical drugs. But even that one botanical drug 5 or 10 years down the line is not going to fit what Ellen needs in a medication. I don't mean to call you out, Ellen, but it's not going to fit
You're right.
what Steph needs in a medication. And that's not fair. And we've done a ton of experimentation, many of us, to find that right product. And that's my concern with this act, is it's really only going to support that single drug on the other side, that who knows what the cost will be. We're still not sure if insurance will cover it, and it will not be a one size fits all, because cannabis is nuanced, because we as patients are nuanced. And so long-winded answer, but good and bad from it. And it's a start, right? And I think a lot of times we settle on that. But the whole idea of advocacy is, okay, let's take that toe in the door to steal from maybe sales, and let's open that door much wider, because it needs to be opened.
Yeah, think that. Any of the other panelists want to respond?
My thoughts on finally getting research into the doctors is it gives them a safe place to comment. Once something comes out, whether it's a drug or just a study on spasms, saying that the plant is assisting in some way, it stops being anecdotal. And the environment, I think, that doctors work in, it constantly under evaluation as to what advice they give or how much they know about it. So it would really be good to get some USA approved documents into the doctor's hands. I know from my own doctor, I talk to him all the time about cannabis, and he's very curious. And all he can go off of is what his patients tell him right now. And he forms his own beliefs, I'm sure, behind closed doors, but he's not really open to share them because there isn't scientific proof that we can utilize. So I'm hoping that at the most basic level, it provides doctors a platform to stand on and get behind one way or the other.
Ellen?
Yes, I think we've for years desperately needed the research. Many medical people will say to me, but there's nothing in research here in this country, but yet you, for instance, look at Israel, who's been researching cannabis for years, and it's there, it's just not here in this country. So yes, we need the research, but I totally agree with Dr. Dahmer. Along with that research, we need to make sure the medical field is very educated, understanding how cannabis works so differently within each person's body. Because if we don't have that understanding and somebody suddenly says to me, okay, this is the capsule our government's now going to allow for you to use, and that's all you're going to get to do, it will not necessarily be magic for me at all. And this is a lifeline for many of us. So it's extremely important, along with the research, that we include the education to people with that too, so that the research is being understood correctly in, administering this medication to people. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Pamela, did you want to add to that?
I think I can just add from a legal sort of higher level perspective of what is happening federally. It's what we like to call like a watershed moment, right? You have a piece of legislation that worked its way through Congress that was signed into law by a president that has cannabis in the name and is driving forward that momentum. So I think we get a lot of time mired down in the details. I know I do as a lawyer, but when in this moment, I really like to zoom out and say that the work was so fundamentally important. There's a ton more to do, but it marks a different day where we are going to see more bills that have cannabis in the title that address some form of the plant. And this one particularly moves us more forward. I mean, I think Dr. Dahmer said it great. We want to see more plant-based medicine, more very specific to what cannabis actually offers to a patient, but you have to start somewhere. And this is a moment where you're going to see more interaction from other federal agencies because they see it doesn't just get shut down. It can make it the whole 100 through our process of law and governance here, because we're a society of law and regulations, and for a long time cannabis has fallen into the need for enforcement, and now we're in the need for information. So I just wanted to take a moment and really appreciate the gravity of what that bill is in the totality of moving us forward.
And I really appreciate that perspective from everyone. I think that it is I mean, I guess when I first, realized that we were watching this bill sort of move through Congress, move through Senate, and seeing Senator Dianne Feinstein and Senator Grassley, who would be the last people you would think would be, I don't even know if Feinstein can say the word cannabis. So the fact that that she actually sponsored it in the Senate and actually put it on the consent calendar is pretty exciting. And it also, I think the other side of that was I felt like that Radio Shack commercial, like, it's 1997, Congress, thanks for passing this bill, sort of like, oh, wow, this would have been the perfect bill to pass in 1997 when Proposition 215 passed. So I think it's definitely, for the people that are on the inside baseball side of things, you're like, oh, we need so much more. But I think it really is an opportunity to say, look, like there is a consensus in the federal government that there's something here. And now let's use that as a wedge to drive the bigger legislation through.
And if I could just add something too, actually to that, because when that bill did pass, the one thing that ASA does that I feel like a lot of other people don't do is that when that bill passed, we looked at what it meant for patients, and we always try to do that. When something passes, we want to be congratulatory, of course, but we also wanted to let people know what else is needed. So we did do a blog about it, and I encourage people to read it. That talks about like the good, but also what else is needed. We're very happy that that passed, but we do know that there's a lot more needed for patients. Okay, so the next question is, there are many views on the avenues of federal regulation. Oh, no, we're in the dark.
Sorry, my computer started dying. I've been so excited by the panels that I forgot to juice up. So Jeff, of course, is taking care of it. Thank you, Jeff.
What happened here? Okay, sorry. So there are many views on the avenues of federal regulation through FDA, USDA, among others, with so many points of view with regards to the most beneficial way for patients and the development of sustainability of whole plant medicine and isomers, derivatives, etc. What would be your advice for the regulators who are faced with these complexities?
I'll just sort of set the tone and then hear comments from everyone. Is that, I think one of the biggest challenges definitely for elected officials in medical cannabis is that they're constantly like, okay, which box does this fit in? Just tell me which box and go away, right? And the reality is that at the federal level, we don't have the box yet for medical cannabis, right? And when we look at what is considered medicine in this country, right? Nutraceuticals, while they're legal, I'm talking about vitamins and supplements and all those things, there is a little bit of guidance on how to produce them safely. And FDA kind of jumps in and out and tests those products. But there aren't any standards on the labeling and that component. And I think most importantly, they're not covered by health insurance. And so you don't, you may have a doctor every once in a while recommending vitamin D, maybe a couple of vitamins, but we really have two American healthcare systems, and one for people who are privileged and can afford it, and I really don't want to see that for medical cannabis. And so I think that all of those agencies where the question came from, all of those agencies have to be involved in regulating medical cannabis. But what we actually need is an Office of Medical Cannabis that can actually, for the first time, look at what does it mean to have a plant-based medicine that actually can help all of these conditions, and how can we create safe access while creating a pathway for more research. And so I'll let any of the other panelists add. I know, Pamela, you have a lot of thoughts on this.
Well, I think my mother used to say, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. That's sort of how I look at educating regulators, because they don't know what they don't know. And I think in this environment, that is a significant amount. I think you need to start with, what is cannabis sativa L, and how did we get to a difference without a distinction from these two plants that are the same genus? Like sometimes they don't even understand that. And then it's explaining to them how this is part of your overall wellness, right? I think sometimes they don't even understand what you went through to get here. So humanizing that conversation, especially as you're going in to talk about why medical cannabis is different than what they hear about that's on the bodega. And then you can start to contextualize the rest of the conversation. You go into a CVS and you know every time that Tylenol that you're buying, whether it's a gel tab or a dissolvable or a capsule, it was done in a standard method each way. If you go and buy St. John's wort or fish oil, they have to go through CNG facilities. Why? Because you would never want to consume something that can harm you or buy something for a loved one that could harm them. And then you ask them if anybody in their life has had an illness that they couldn't get treatment for or was difficult to deal with insurance. And you try to find that touch point. And I have found once you hit that chord, then when you start talking about lack of standardization, lack of access, the ability to not be able to afford your medication, but be able to get Vicodin at 60 or 70, $6 or $7 for 30 pills. And this is how much cannabis costs and what you went through. You need to find that touch point that makes it relatable. And then you can start to build off of that. But in the conversations that I've had around trying to explain what I want in something like the 2023 Farm Bill or the challenges around 841 or some of those other House bills, it's that they don't even understand what the problem is and how it relates to members within their district or voters in general. And there is no better advocate that I've ever seen in a room than a patient who truly and authentically came to cannabis because they didn't either have another option or it was the only option that worked. And that will change how somebody absorbs the rest of the more complicated information. So I thank all of you for sharing your stories and standing up and saying, I am a cannabis consumer, because those are the things that change the conversation.
Any other panelists that weigh in?
If I could just add, along with what Pamela was saying, I think we need to make sure that cannabis continues and becomes safe for everybody. It's not always the case. It's very easy for somebody to get away using pesticides because they suddenly have a problem with mites or they have mold and they go ahead and sell that product anyway. So testing needs to be there for everybody's product so that what we're putting into our body is safe. So I just wanted to add that too, along with what Pamela said.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that up, Ellen. And actually today, there's going to be a little short presentation that I'm doing. The last presentation, it'll be just 15 minutes, but I'm going over just that, the impact of contaminants on patients. And I think something that maybe people who use it recreationally, where maybe they're just using cannabis once a month when they go to a concert, the impact of pesticides or molds, mildews, that those may not be that impactful on their health. But for patients that are using cannabis products 5 times a day, those contaminants and pesticides, they really have an impact to health. And it's something that's really hard to diagnose, right? Like, so if like the symptoms look like so many other things. So if you're talking to your doctor, you might not even think like, oh, wow, there's a problem with my cannabis, right? So I hope people stick around for that. And thanks, Ellen, for bringing that up. Stormy or Dr. Dahmer, do you want to add to that topic?
I don't. I think Pamela killed it on that one.
I'd love to add a little bit too, and I think Pamela killed it as well. I want to reiterate again, and I think Steph, something that you were hinting at too is one, just congrats for for reaching out, right, to regulators and speaking of it. So one is like these little wins when you're an advocate, right? I think we got to pat ourselves on the. We always are hungry for more, but one, pat yourself on the back, and these little wins are great. So just reaching out is huge. And then in all my experience, and I'm not much of a politician, nor do I interact a ton with them, but I think just for humans in general, the personal story is so impactful, and really throwing out there your own personal story specific to, right, one, what the message we're trying to get across, this is a medicine. And so your personal story, how it's a medicine. I think a lot of people, and I know physicians, love to hear potentially about how this substituted for other medications or how it improved your life. I think those are very strong talking points. And then, I think what we all want, safety and efficacy, right? And really getting that front and center, that I have the right to a safe and efficacious medication. And then being specific to kind of what works for you. And I think in terms of where do we hitch our wagon, I think that's the big question. And that's where all of us kind of have to be not policy experts. And that's where ASA does such an amazing job to tee us up with, this is what this act is about. Is this, something I want to hitch my wagon to? Does it really open the doors for me as a patient that utilizes cannabis as a therapy to continue to do that in a safe, effective manner that I can cross state lines and check the boxes that we need? And so we should know what's on that list. And then when it comes out, let's all have those regulators on our dialing list and make sure we're reaching out.
I just add to that I totally agree with what Dr. Dahmer said. I didn't realize how powerful your personal story is until the first time my husband and I went to the State House, and I sat there with this little old lady and shared my story of why I'm using cannabis, and realizing people were listening and people didn't understand. And it's not always that they don't care, it's they don't understand. We need to help educate people of what this is doing. And I have found it, being older and using this, very powerful in terms of people listening and thinking, my gosh, if this lady in her 70s is saying this and she's not walking around high, maybe I need to listen. So I agree with you. The story is amazing, and people should not be afraid. They should be proud of the story they have and share it, because it will go a long way. And through ASA, we've had the rights to go onto the Hill and speak to our legislators. It's been so powerful. And to this day, whenever we see any of them back here in Rhode Island, they remember us. Of course, a lot of it's my service dog, Maggie, that they remember first, but they do remember us. And it really does make a difference. So be proud of your story. Thanks.
And it is, I also want to know that I really appreciate how it's one thing to say, use your voice and, and actually to do it. And it is very vulnerable. Like I don't ever think of myself as a patient usually until there's a doctor in the room. And I'm like, that's the doctor, I'm a patient, right? And so, and a, part of my identity is being, is being a healthy person and being independent. And so it feels counterintuitive sometimes to put out my weakness in front of people. And, but I want to assure people that that's not how other people read it when you are telling them about your disability, about your, like, why you're using medical cannabis. And it really is the main thing that breaks down those walls. And I think, we've been talking a lot this week and last week about, what's happened on Capitol Hill. And I think, we did pass the medical cannabis research bill on one hand, and then, the banking, the Safe Banking Act didn't pass. And there were a lot of lobbyists kind of talking to each other saying, oh, it didn't pass because of some big conspiracy. But, one of the reasons it didn't pass is that, one, the country isn't ready for adult use, and two, a lot of the cannabis industry decided to dump medical cannabis and to dump the patient advocates that brought them the freedoms that they have. And that, like, we're not, like, this fight is not over. The political part of this is not over. And so you can't just jump into having regulatory lobbyists when this is still illegal. Like, this is still a job for advocates and for advocacy.
And so I just invite people, reconsider the way you treat advocates, reconsider, what you're investing in. And like, you will have plenty of time to pay for DC lobbyists to help you down the road with regulations. But if there is not somebody calling your elected officials back home, you're not going to pass legislation. And so, I really hope everyone, really sees that it wasn't just by chance that medical cannabis legislation passed. We've been here in DC since 2006. This is our 10th annual conference. For 7 years, we were bringing patients into their elected officials' offices, and our patients are continuing to call those reps. So I think we have to remember that this is still a political issue, and that there's not an industry until there is a legal framework, no matter how many magazines there are and other sort of backups to back that up. Sorry I don't mean that to be negative, but it is frustrating, right? To have people, who we know that the only reason they are legally existing is because of patient advocacy. The reason that they have those state licenses is because of the work we've done. And as soon as we passed the CJS amendment and protected them from going to jail, they pushed us away. And so I hope this is sort of a wake-up call that we're still needed to win this fight. Other questions?
Yeah. Steph, I want to just tack on real quick to that.
Yeah,
and I think I'm like an optimist to a fault, that I get annoying. So let me know if I get too annoying, but it's just such an amazing thought to think. And I say this often, but I can't think of another medication, recommended by physicians across the nation that was brought to medicine by patients. Right. And just let that sit in for a second. And yeah, we all know there's much more work to be done. But I think at times too, we do have to just reflect the uniqueness. And I think that's why it is, no pun intended, a difficult pill to swallow, right? for many of those that we're trying to convince, because it's such a different package. I can't think of another medicine that was really brought to the medical community by patients. We are used to a very different avenue, right? The pharmaceutical avenue. And so it is, and I say that in a way to give power to all the advocates and all the work that you do and the work that everyone else is doing. That, wow, what an amazing thought, just to let that sink in for a second.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dahmer. It is a good reminder. And the only, sort of other, similar pathway, which is, definitely something that we've looked to for inspiration, was the HIV/AIDS movement, and really their demand for treatment, that they were told by our country to die, and through their advocacy and through their fight, they forced the federal government to study them and to invest in medications. And I think that we're still way before the Ryan's Act was passed. Like, we're still way before that point, that milestone in the HIV/AIDS movement, if we're comparing. And I think part of that is that patients have to continue the fight until everyone has access. We haven't really won. But I also want to remind people that until we pass federal law, these laws can get stripped away from us, right? And like, look at what happened today. Today, President Biden is signing a bill to make sure that LGBT rights are sanctified, right? That can't be taken away by an act of Congress. And I'll also point out that he's doing that with a big press conference on a Tuesday and not Friday at 4 o'clock, like when he signed our bill. But I do say, like that, even though gay marriage, had made all of these, they had passed in all these states, they had passed bills in Congress. It wasn't until today, till this afternoon, that those rights are codified forever as their rights in this country. And so, don't think for a minute that just because you have access today, that getting the wrong governor in your state, having the wrong president here in the White House, what if Jeff Sessions comes back into the Department of Justice without the Russians keeping him busy? I mean, like, all of that is still a possibility. Do we have some more questions, Debbie?
One last question. This one's for Stormy. Because I know you talk a lot about the culture of cannabis, and I love that. And I know that when you worked with High Times magazine as a big cultural magazine, but I wonder, why are patients always left out of the culture of cannabis? Because patients are part of that culture too, you know? And I'm just wondering
Right.
what your thoughts.
Oh my God, I have so many. It's absolutely amazing how this all evolved. So when I joined in 2016, I thought how amazing to sell weed legally. Yeah, I came from the business. I was like, this is going to be amazing. Stoner growing up, stoner label growing up, all the stigma. Who knew the turn it would take when I talked about those kids that taught me about medicine and started digging in as to what it was really about, and all the things that Steph said as to how we got to where we are. I hadn't even thought about it, but you start meeting the folks, meeting the patients, meeting the Ellens, meeting the groups that have done it. And really, you know, High Times for me, that dream started when I was a kid. Like, wow, I could learn about cannabis from this magazine. It was the only thing that talked about it, that gave me any insight into why I liked it so much. Still not medicinal, right? We all know now. I was taking it as a medicine, made me feel better, ADD, whatever it is. We shouldn't have to justify ourselves by exposing our HIPAA. You know, my word, every time we have to talk about it, you're violating our HIPAA rules that we set up for every other medicine in the world. It's insane. But for me, you know, getting to High Times, getting on the board, getting to do all that corporate stuff was great. But what was so fascinating by the time I got there is I had recognized it as a megaphone. It was like, you know what? We're going to be able to move some mountains now, because the next evolution is the patients, the prisoners, the civil rights, all the discrepancies around this beautiful plant. And that's what I had hoped High Times can be. You know, I don't think it's a secret that they chose the capital route. I find that criminal, absolutely criminal what High Times did next. Well, if they do it next, it'll still be criminal, but mark my words. But the real true social criminal piece was leaving behind the patients. You know, yes, the farmers and their IPs, we should protect all of that. They deserve that. There are doctors to this point. They risk their lives to get us medicine across these states. But, you know, it is a social responsibility. That's where I landed. I did run for office in the state of Utah just to start talking about cannabis out loud, you know, just to say, you know, acknowledge it, recognize it. Like, it can't be something that's forgotten. We can't be as patients. We took it to this point. Like, it's our voice. It matters. You know, when we talk about sharing the stories, we have to share the stories, because High Times isn't doing it for us. They decided not to. The magazines aren't going to do it for us. All the capitalists came in. They decided not to do it for us. You know, if only we had a friend at Pfizer. Like, do we know anybody single at Pfizer? I'll date them. Well, no, I'm just kidding. But you know what I'm saying? It's like the idea that it gets forgotten over capitalism is really what, you know, bonds us as an industry, I think. You know, when I see the traditional farmers that have gone the route of adult use to pay their bills, I have to give them that. You know, they got to get there too in the path that's being laid out for them. But, you know, as they become more solidified, I think they'll be able to stop all the regulations they have to jump through just to have a business. You know, will it be more complicated with medicinal? Probably, you know, possibly, but at least they'll be ready to do it. You know, I don't think they've forgotten. I think they've gotten busy, not our traditional farmers. But these big brands, 100% they've forgotten. They give you a little, you know, stanchion where it's like medical, you get to go to the front of the line, do. Okay, that's not enough. It's great. Like, I don't even want to wait in line in Disneyland, but you know, there's got to be more. And I love the cannabis community that keeps pushing it forward. The bud tenders that learn so much, they change lives. They study this, and it's time for our government too. So yeah, High Times should have taken this for all of us. And, paid the bill actually to lobby for it, but they didn't. So that's where I stand on all that.
Thank you, Stormy.
Yeah.
We just have a few more minutes left. And so this has been an amazing panel. And, again, I always tell people our conference, the ASA conference, is an opportunity for Debbie and I to bring people that we have the privilege of meeting throughout the year that shape our vision and our strategy, and share these stories with all of our members. And so first, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming and sharing what you've taught me with our members. And I just want to let everyone close out if there isn't something we've covered, or if there's something you want to add. So we'll start with you, Ellen.
Certainly. I just want to encourage people to remember that not to be afraid to share your story. It's not difficult. It's not like you're having to go to a book and memorize something and research something out. Your story is, you're the one that knows it. So it's going to be very personal and something that you're going to know how to respond about. So, and just understand that personal story is going to help the cause. It's really paved the way for years working with ASA to share our stories. And I just want to include that I really look forward to the future where we return to a doctor-patient relationship, that I can calmly sit down and talk to my doctor. And if I happen to have a rarer condition right now, I fortunately fit under the category of chronic pain to get into the program in Rhode Island, but there's many people with my condition across the country that still cannot fit into the program. And I think that's wrong. I think if a doctor believes there's a chance that this medication, the use of cannabis, might help somebody's life, that we don't have to wait for it to be a qualifying condition within the state. It's heartbreaking. So I look forward to that for the future. So thank you very much. And thank you for letting me speak. I really appreciate being part of this.
It's always great to see you. Dr. Dahmer?
Yeah, I echo that. Just thanks for allowing me to be a part of this and the platform here to share some ideas, and the amazing conference and the work that you guys do. And I just always I like to talk about my background in integrative medicine. And that is that, chronic pain is incredibly complex and very challenging. And I don't need to tell many people on this call how that is. And I'm afraid too that, again, speaking of capitalism and how that oftentimes runs away with things, that where I see a race oftentimes to supersize the THC in cannabis from a business perspective. And I'm not going to tell people what is that perfect dose, because we don't know that yet, but to approach this plant from an integrative perspective. And that means that it's not a panacea, right? It's not the only tool in the box. And to really approach many of these conditions, which are complex, with multiple different angles, right? An integrative approach. And I think that cannabis, the plant, works best when it's a part of those multiple modalities in treating chronic pain, in treating inflammatory bowel disease, in treating, many of the disease processes that are qualifying conditions in the states where there are these programs. And I just, every time I get that chance, I really like to reiterate that, to use it as one tool in a full toolbox to address many of these issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dahmer. And thank you again so much to our panel. And I'm going to push us into our next panel. But before I do, can I get a little, everyone clap for our amazing panel? Nice. We got the little virtual clapping. Love it. And again, all of these panels are going to be available online next week for you to share with your friends and family. And all of the panelists are available to continue this conversation. So thank you again so much for being a part of this year's conference. And I hope I get to see you in person in the spring.
Looking forward to that. You take care. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
On behalf of Americans for Safe Act staff, the board, and all of our members, we want to say a very special thank you to our Unity sponsors for the 2022 Unity Conference. This is our 10th annual conference, and I know many of these sponsors have been with us for the last 10 years. So I want to say a very special thank you to Dr. Bonners, to Metric, to 3C Cannabis Consulting, to Canopy Growth, Tacoma Wellness, the American Herbal Products Association, Cannabis for Cancer Declaration, Cannabis MD, Columbia Care, Council for Federal Cannabis Regulations, Healer, the National Pain Relief, Supply Chain OpEx Consulting, the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, UKTI Collective, and Evoke. Again, thank you so much. This has been a great conference, and we couldn't have done it without you all.